F.C. Bauer, Walter Bauer, even Kierkegaard, even Thomas Jefferson believe that Paul is the corrupter of the gospel. In Galatians, and keep in mind that Paul, he authored more than half of the New Testament. All of his letters and epistles were written before the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. In Galatians, written around 55 of the Common Era, Paul admits that he has enemies. And he says that these enemies believe in his own words, heteron evangelion, heteron, a heterodox gospel. His enemies believe in another gospel. So Paul is not, he has other enemies, like the Jews were his enemies, pagans are his enemies, but he's not talking about them here. He's talking about other Christians that he considers to be his enemies. F.C. Bauer is sort of the traditional authority on the book of Galatians, and this is what he says happened. He says, Paul, a freelance apostle, goes into Galatia in modern-day Turkey and evangelizes the populace. James in Jerusalem, the successor of Christ, he hears about Paul's deviant teachings, so he sends his own apostles into Galatia with letters of recommendation. This is what Paul is telling us. They have letters of recommendation. What are these letters? These are ijazat. These are teaching licenses that are given to them by James, the brother of Jesus. Because sanad, like talaqi, knowledge, is very important to the early Christian movement. Paul does not have sanad. He's not an apostle. He doesn't have permission to teach the gospel. This is what F.C. Bauer says, based on Paul's writings in Galatians. So these apostles go into Galatia to correct Paul's deviant teachings. And Paul names his enemies in Galatia. You know, you read like something like the book of Romans. Paul wrote Romans. And, you know, that's Paul's sort of Christology, his soteriology. But the scholars say that Galatians is really what Paul was thinking. This is really what he's thinking, right? So he names his enemies. He says, you know, these apostles in Jerusalem, he calls them so-called pillars. He calls them hypocrites. He calls them, sarcastically, super apostles, right? Who are these apostles he's talking about? He name drops. He says their names are Yaakov and Kepha and Yochanan. James, Peter, and John. These are direct students of Isa Alaihissalam that Paul is accusing of hypocrisy. There's fundamental difference of opinion between the Jamesonian school with respect to what the gospel is and the Pauline school. In the Gospel of Thomas, statement number 12, which is not in the New Testament, obviously, but some consider to be a fifth gospel. Some even consider the Gospel of Thomas to be more early than the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Jesus says in statement number 12, in the Gospel of Thomas, when I am gone, you must go to James the just, for whose sake heaven and earth came into being. Jesus here is giving the apostles his khalifa, as it were, endorsing James as his successor. James the just, Yaakov had-Saddiq. Interestingly enough, the Khalifa of Isa Alaihissalam, his laqab, his nickname, Has-Saddiq, is the same laqab of the Khalifa of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, As-Siddiq. Right? Has-Saddiq, Yaakov, Had-Saddiq in Hebrew, and Abu Bakr As-Siddiq in Arabic. That's in the Gospel of Thomas. In Philippians, Paul calls his enemies, these other apostles, these other Christians who believe in another gospel, he calls them dogs, enemies of the cross. Enemies of the cross. Raymond Brown, a great authority, a sage exegete of the New Testament, he says this is probably because these apostles denied the crucifixion of Isa Alaihissalam. So the New Testament is by and large representative of Pauline Christianity. And the cross is central. Remember what Paul said? If Christ is not raised, our faith is vain, is null and void. 14 of the 27 books of the New Testament are either written by Paul or someone pretending to be Paul. One book of the New Testament is written by James, the successor of Isa Alaihissalam. So how did this happen?